Astounding vote. Conservatives join Liberals to vote Bill C-5. Canadians denied their tax refunds. A political storm has erupted in Canada's Parliament as the Conservative Party unexpectedly sided with the Liberals to push forward Bill C-5, a piece of legislation that has sparked fierce controversy across the country. At the same time, the Liberal government blocked a motion that would have recovered $64 million of taxpayer money paid for a poorly managed government contract tied to the ArriveCAN app. These moves have left many Canadians questioning whether their elected officials are prioritizing their interests or protecting political power and special interests. The apparent contradiction, supporting an expansive federal power grab on one hand, while rejecting calls for accountability on public spending on the other, has deepened public frustration and distrust. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland introduced Bill C-5 with a two-pronged approach. First, to break down internal trade barriers between provinces, promoting economic efficiency and labor mobility. Second, to grant the federal cabinet broad powers to override existing laws on infrastructure and resource projects deemed in the national interest. The trade reforms, on their own, are seen by many as a positive step toward unifying Canada's fragmented internal economy, potentially easing burdens that slow the movement of goods and skilled workers. Yet, it is the second aspect of Bill C-5 that has drawn heavy criticism and suspicion. Critics warn this could mark a dangerous centralization of power, allowing cabinet ministers to bypass crucial environmental protections, Indigenous consultations, and parliamentary oversight. Environmental advocates and opposition politicians have highlighted the risks posed by the National Interest Clause. This provision would empower the cabinet to override legislation, such as the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the Species at Risk Act, simply by declaring a project essential for Canada's future. Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party, expressed her deep disappointment with the bill, stating that it mixes two very different proposals into one, forcing Parliament to accept sweeping powers it should not have. She has called on legislators to separate the trade reforms from the expansive powers granted to Cabinet, fearing that rushing the bill through Parliament with limited hearings could lead to decisions that harm Canada's environment and democratic traditions. Adding to the concern, Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, often a critical voice within his own party, issued a strong warning against Bill C-5. While acknowledging the need for economic development, he stressed that growth cannot come at the cost of sidelining democratic accountability and environmental safeguards. He compared Bill C-5 to Ontario Premier Doug Ford's controversial legislation, which created special economic zones, allowing the provincial government to bypass environmental reviews and municipal input. Erskine-Smith and groups like Eco-Justice have described such measures as threats to democracy, fearing that Bill C-5's federal powers could similarly erode public trust and the rule of law by rushing projects without adequate scrutiny. Despite these concerns, the Conservative Party's decision to support the bill's progression took many by surprise. Several Conservative MPs, including Shannon Stubbs, voiced hope that future committee stages would bring amendments to clarify vague terms like national interest and impose greater transparency and deadlines on the decision-making process. However, skepticism remains strong, especially given the bill's fast-tracked schedule. Parliamentary committees have been allocated just 2 days to hear from witnesses and debate the bill's details before Parliament summer recess, a timeline many argue is too short to allow for proper examination of such a sweeping law. Other Conservative figures, like Greg McLean, criticized the Liberals for using Bill C-5 as a way to gloss over deeper policy failures, especially related to previous legislation such as Bill C-69 and the government's handling of pipeline projects. McLean argued that Ottawa's attempt to centralize power once again undermines provincial authority and feeds tensions between levels of government. The Bloc Québécois and the New Democratic Party have echoed this viewpoint, with the Bloc warning that the bill threatens Quebec's jurisdiction and Indigenous treaty rights by handing the federal cabinet a blank check to push through controversial projects without meaningful consultation. On the government side, House Leader Stephen McKinnon defended Bill C-5, arguing it is necessary to move nation-building projects forward efficiently. He pointed to public opinion polls showing support for improved internal trade and infrastructure investment, especially in Quebec, as evidence that the bill's goals resonate with Canadians. Still, The government's defense has not quieted critics who feel the legislation sacrifices important checks and balances in the name of expediency. Meanwhile, the controversy deepened with a separate parliamentary vote initiated by the Conservatives targeting the Liberal government's handling of the ArriveCAN app contract. The motion demanded that the government recover $64 million paid to GC Strategies, a firm contracted to develop the app but found by the Auditor General to have no verifiable deliverables tied to the funds. The motion also sought a permanent ban on GC Strategies and its founders from receiving future federal contracts. While this motion passed overwhelmingly with cross-party support, the Liberals opposed it, sparking outrage from opposition MPs and many Canadians who viewed the Liberal resistance as a refusal to hold itself accountable for wasted taxpayer dollars. The juxtaposition of these two votes, the Liberals and Conservatives collaborating on expanding executive power through Bill C-5, yet divided sharply on taxpayer accountability in the ArriveCAN scandal, has provoked strong reactions. Many citizens perceive a disconnect between Ottawa's priorities and public interests. Online forums, social media, and grassroots activists have expressed alarm that Parliament is moving swiftly to undermine environmental protections and democratic oversight while ignoring calls to recover millions lost to questionable government spending. As Bill C-5 heads to committee this week, the future of the bill remains uncertain. There is growing pressure for Conservatives to reconsider their position before the final vote and for the Liberals to allow meaningful amendments that would balance economic progress with environmental and democratic safeguards. How these dynamics unfold will have lasting implications for Canada's political landscape, federal-provincial relations, and public trust in government. For many Canadians, this is a defining moment about governance and accountability. Bill C-5 challenges whether Parliament will uphold democratic principles and respect Indigenous rights or enable unchecked executive power under the banner of economic development. Simultaneously, the refusal to address financial mismanagement in the ArriveCAN contract underscores long-standing frustrations over government transparency and stewardship of public funds. In the weeks ahead, citizens and political observers alike will watch closely as debates continue, amendments are proposed, and the bill approaches final passage. The outcome will reveal much about the balance of power in Canada and whether elected officials are listening to the voices of their constituents or merely advancing partisan agendas. Ultimately, Bill C-5's journey is about more than a law. It is about the kind of democracy Canadians want to preserve for generations to come.